Picture yourself as a Roman soldier posted outside a sealed stone chamber in Alexandria. Behind that door sits Cleopatra, Egypt's queen, pharaoh, descendant of the Ptolemies, the most formidable woman the ancient world has ever known. She's been locked in there for 7 days now. You catch sounds from inside, sometimes not weeping, not screaming, just the shuffle of movement, quiet footfalls against stone, fabric whispering, her voice speaking now and then, as though someone's listening, though you're absolutely certain she's in there by herself. Before we dive deeper, there's something critical you need to grasp about how Cleopatra died. Everything you believe you know is false. That romantic tale about the serpent concealed in a fig basket, probably made up. The vision of Cleopatra passing peacefully in her royal bed, loyal servants at her side, almost definitely fiction. What truly transpired inside those locked chambers between August 1st and August 12th in 30 BC was something much more intentional, much more strategic, and far more telling about Rome's methods for destroying its adversaries. This isn't a tale of suicide. It's the story of a deliberate psychological campaign engineered to shatter the final pharaoh of Egypt before permitting her to die. The real mystery isn't how Cleopatra died. It's why Octavian required her to die in one particular way, and why he needed 10 full days to accomplish it. If understanding power at its most controlled and calculated level matters to you, think about subscribing. This channel exists to reveal the mechanisms of domination that molded ancient civilizations in ways romantic historians prefer to overlook. Let me walk you through what actually occurred during Cleopatra's last 10 days alive. The destruction kicked off on August 1st, 30 BC. Inside the tomb Cleopatra had constructed for herself, Mark Antony lay dying. He'd thrown himself on his sword after being falsely informed that Cleopatra had already perished. Only she hadn't. She'd locked herself inside her tomb with her 2 most faithful handmaidens and whatever treasure she could haul in with her. The tomb rose near the Temple of Isis. Solid stone construction, 2 levels tall, heavy wooden doors, no vulnerable entry points, engineered like a fortress, because Cleopatra knew that in death she'd require the same protection she'd commanded in life. Antony was bleeding to death at the tomb's base. His soldiers pleaded with Cleopatra to unlock the doors. She wouldn't. She couldn't take that risk. Octavian's forces were moments away. Plutarch tells us that Cleopatra and her attendants dropped ropes from the upper floor and hauled Antony upward through a high window, dragging him inside while he still drew breath. His blood streaked the stone walls as they pulled. Consider that image for a moment. Egypt's queen hoisting her dying lover into her tomb because opening the door meant getting captured. Antony died in her embrace on that upper level. His last words, recorded by Plutarch, "Do not pity me in this final twist of fate. I was the greatest of Romans, conquered only by another Roman." He died convinced his life had held meaning. Cleopatra had mere minutes to mourn before Octavian's troops showed up, but Octavian didn't assault the tomb. He didn't smash through the doors. He didn't force entry. Instead, he dispatched a messenger, Proculus. The message was straightforward. Caesar wanted to negotiate surrender terms and discuss her children's future. Cleopatra refused to open up. She conversed with Proculus through a slim gap in the stone, declaring she'd only talk if Octavian promised her children's safety. While she spoke, Proculus's soldiers were scaling the exterior walls. They slipped through the same opening that had been used to pull Antony inside just hours before. They caught her off guard. Cleopatra grabbed for a dagger tucked in her garments and attempted to end her own life, but the soldiers anticipated this. They tackled her, wrestled away the weapon, held her down. Cassius says Cleopatra screamed as they seized her. "You will not drag me alive to Rome. You will not display me. Kill me right now." But the soldiers carried explicit orders. Keep her breathing. Use whatever force necessary. Don't let her die. They hauled her from the tomb, moved her to the palace, locked her in a guarded room on the 2nd floor. That instant August 1st marked when the real destruction started. Octavian didn't merely want Cleopatra dead. He required something specific from her death, and that demanded time. Egypt, the richest kingdom in the ancient world, now belonged to him. But back in Rome, he confronted a problem. He'd just finished a civil war, Romans slaughtering Romans. Citizens spilling citizens' blood. he had to justify it. He needed to reshape a civil war into something more palatable, a conflict against a foreign threat, a battle against a dangerous Eastern queen who'd corrupted Mark Antony and endangered Rome itself. But Cleopatra wasn't some barbarian. She was educated, spoke multiple languages, politically savvy. She'd resided in Rome, conversed in Latin, encountered senators, bargained with Cicero. Romans understood she wasn't a caricature, and that created the obstacle. Complex enemies don't make effective propaganda. Octavian had to simplify her, transform her from a political opponent into a symbol. The Eastern seductress, the Egyptian sorceress, the foreign contamination that needed elimination for Rome to endure. And, most importantly, he needed to parade her through Rome's streets during his triumph alive, because Cleopatra grasped precisely what that parade signified, and she'd sooner die than permit it. But Octavian had 10 days to ensure she didn't. Octavian needed Rome's citizens to witness the dangerous queen defeated, humiliated, shattered. Roman triumphs adhered to a pattern. A vanquished enemy ruler was marched through Rome's streets in shackles, exhibited to the masses, publicly degraded, and at the parade's conclusion traditionally executed in the Tullianum prison. This is how Rome mocked victory, through ritualized humiliation of the conquered. Octavian's entire political destiny hinged on that spectacle, on parading Cleopatra through Rome as living evidence that he'd defeated the East. But Cleopatra comprehended that formula. She'd witnessed triumphs before. She'd been in Rome in 44 BC during Caesar's Gallic triumph. She'd observed, as Vercingetorix, the Gallic king, was hauled through the streets in chains and then strangled in the Tullianum. She knew exactly what Octavian planned for her. 2 wills in direct conflict. 10 days to settle it. Here's how Octavian tackled the problem. The chamber holding Cleopatra was selected deliberately. Second level of the palace, single door, 1 narrow window too small for anyone to squeeze through. Guards posted outside around the clock, everything potentially lethal removed. No blades, no daggers, no rope, no sharp implements whatsoever. Plutarch reports they even searched her clothes and hair daily, checking for concealed weapons, checking for poison, checking for anything she might use to kill herself. Cleopatra was stripped of everything but basic clothing and confined alone in an empty stone chamber. But Octavian's approach extended beyond mere confinement. He didn't just need to stop her from dying. He had to crush her desire to die. Think about the psychology here. Cleopatra wanted death because death meant dignity. Death meant authority. Death meant Octavian could never parade her through Rome, so Octavian had to flip that instinct. He had to make her crave survival, and to accomplish that, he exploited the one thing she couldn't abandon: her children. Cleopatra had 4 children. Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, was 17. The younger 3 twins, Alexander, Helios, and Cleopatra Selene, both 10, and the youngest, Ptolemy, just 6, were Mark Antony's. Octavian's soldiers separated them from their mother instantly, relocated them to different palace areas, kept them under surveillance. On August 2nd, the day following Cleopatra's capture, Octavian dispatched another messenger, not Proculus this time, but Gaius Cornelius Gallus, poet, soldier, diplomat. The message was exact, controlled, elegant in its brutality. Caesar wants you to know your children are being well looked after. Their future rests entirely on your cooperation. Should anything happen to you, Caesar cannot promise their safety. Caesarion, particularly, is in an extremely vulnerable position. Cleopatra understood instantly. Caesarion was Julius Caesar's biological son. That fact alone made him a threat to Octavian, whose legitimacy rested on being Caesar's adopted heir. If Cleopatra died, Caesarion would be defenseless. He'd be eliminated. But if Cleopatra lived, if she cooperated, if she yielded, if she allowed herself to be exploited, then perhaps Caesarion would survive. Perhaps all her children would. This was the snare. Octavian handed Cleopatra a reason to live that directly opposed her reason to die. Her dignity demanded death. Her children demanded survival. For the following 10 days, Cleopatra existed trapped inside that impossible dilemma. The gap between dignity and motherhood. On August 3rd, the pressure intensified. Octavian sent architects to her chamber. They showed up with measuring instruments, marked chords, wax tablets for recording. They measured her height, her approximate weight, her body's dimensions. Plutarch tells us, based on testimony from one of Cleopatra's surviving handmaidens, the queen asked what they were doing. Preparing for Caesar's triumph, one architect answered, "The display must be correctly constructed to accommodate you. Consider the impact of that moment." They were measuring her like an object, like furniture, like a prop to be incorporated into a construction. They weren't simply collecting measurements. They were sending a message. This is happening. You're going to Rome. We're building the cage right now. And they came back the following day, August 4th, then August 5th, then August 6th. Each day brought more measurements, more questions. What garments would she wear? What jewelry would Roman spectators recognize, whether she'd be in chains or simply restrained? They discussed it before her, debated particulars, the presentation, the visual impact. They talked about her humiliation as if it were an artistic endeavor. This wasn't planning, this was conditioning. Every day the architects returned, death grew more attractive. But every day Octavian countered that pull with another message. Updates about her children. "Caesarion asked about you today. He's anxious. He needs his mother. Pull her toward death with the horror of the triumph. Pull her back toward life with terror for her children. And trap her between the two." Cleopatra was isolated in that chamber. Her two handmaidens who'd been with her in the tomb, Eros and Charmian, were held in separate rooms. She could hear them occasionally, their voices drifting faintly through the stone, but she wasn't permitted to speak with them. No one to confide in, no one to strategize with, no one to share the weight of the impossible choice being forced upon her. Cassius Dio reports that Cleopatra repeatedly requested to see her children and was denied each time, "Not until Caesar is confident of your cooperation." But she could hear them. Palace walls were stone and sound traveled readily. Sometimes she heard the younger children at play, laughter floating through the narrow window too small for anyone to climb through. Consider that torture, hearing your children close by. Knowing they're near enough to hear but not near enough to embrace. Not knowing if the sounds are genuine or fabricated. Not knowing if they're safe or if the sounds are part of the manipulation. Modern psychology calls this learned helplessness. Strip away someone's agency. Eliminate their options. Make them dependent on their captor for even basic information about the people they love. Octavian was executing that process with precision. By August 7th, Plutarch says, Cleopatra stopped eating. When guards delivered food, she rejected it. She sat in the chamber, silent, staring at stone walls. The guards reported this immediately. Octavian's response wasn't to force-feed her. It was to bring Caesarion. For the first time in 6 days, Cleopatra saw her eldest son. The encounter was short. Guards remained close the entire time. But Plutarch records what Caesarion told his mother. "Please eat. Please, look after yourself. I need you. We all need you." Then the guards led him away. That night, Cleopatra ate, and that reveals everything. The threat to her children was no longer theoretical. It had a face, a voice, a plea. How do you choose death when your son begs you to live? On August 8th, Octavian came personally. It was the first time he'd addressed Cleopatra directly since her capture. He came alone, except for guards positioned outside the door. We don't have a full account of what was said, but fragments survive from Plutarch, who questioned survivors, from Cassius Dio, who accessed Roman records, from Strabo, who reached Alexandria shortly after these events. The offer was simple. Participate willingly in the triumph. Walk through Rome under your own strength, not in chains. Preserve some dignity in defeat. In exchange, your children live. All of them, including Caesarion. They'll be raised in Rome as wards of the state, educated, protected, given futures. Refuse, and Caesarion dies the day you die. The younger children might survive, they might not, no guarantees made. Cleopatra requested time to think. Octavian granted her 3 days. After that, we sail for Rome, with or without your cooperation. Choose. This is the brilliance of the trap. Octavian wasn't providing an escape. He was offering justification, a way for Cleopatra to convince herself that enduring humiliation served a higher purpose. That surrender wasn't weakness, but sacrifice for her children. It was a lie. Octavian was never going to spare Caesarion. The boy was too dangerous. But Cleopatra didn't know that yet. For 3 days, she lived suspended between hope and despair. Then, on August 11th, 30 BC, something shifted. We don't know precisely what occurred. The sources are vague, fragmented, but something made Cleopatra grasp the truth. Maybe she overheard guards talking. Maybe someone loyal to her succeeded in passing a message. Maybe she simply understood Octavian well enough to see through the performance. However it happened, by August 11th, Cleopatra knew Caesarion was going to die. The negotiations were theater. The promises were empty. Cooperation would alter nothing. Octavian intended to kill her son regardless of her choice. Plutarch tells us that Cleopatra then asked permission to visit Antony's tomb. She said she wanted to make offerings to honor his memory before the voyage to Rome. It was a reasonable request, and Octavian approved it. She was escorted to the tomb under heavy guard, permitted inside for 1 hour. The soldiers watched as she made offerings, watched her pray, watched her pour libations over the place where Antony had died. They didn't see her palm, the small clay vial concealed within the tomb's wall. They didn't notice her slip it into her clothing. When she was returned to her chamber, Cleopatra requested a meal. She specifically asked for figs, fresh figs from the market. The guards examined the basket thoroughly. They searched for hidden weapons, poison, anything dangerous. They saw only fruit. They allowed it through. This is where the snake enters the story. The popular version claims Cleopatra concealed an asp, an Egyptian cobra, inside the basket of figs. It's dramatic, symbolic. The cobra was linked with Egyptian royalty, but several ancient historians, including Strabo, questioned that account. The timeline doesn't fit. The symptoms recorded don't clearly match cobra venom, and snakes are notoriously unreliable for suicide. What makes more sense based on the evidence is that Cleopatra had secured poison earlier, that she'd hidden it in Antony's tomb during the days she was barricaded there, and that she recovered it during her final visit. What happened next would conclude the 10 days and determine whether Cleopatra died broken or in control. The exact method matters less than what came next. August 12th, 30 BC. Early morning, the guards outside Cleopatra's chamber heard nothing unusual. No screams, no struggle, just silence. Around the 3rd hour, they opened the door to deliver her breakfast. Cleopatra was dead. She lay on a golden couch dressed in royal regalia. Her 2 handmaidens were with her. Eros was already dead at the couch's foot. Charmian was still alive, using her remaining strength to adjust the diadem on Cleopatra's head. Plutarch says one of the guards asked her, "Was this well done?" Charmian replied, "Extremely well-fitting for a descendant of so many kings." Then she died. Cleopatra was 39 years old. This wasn't a suicide born of despair. It was a final act of control. For 10 days, Octavian had attempted to break her, tried to make her choose life so he could parade her through Rome, tried to use her love for her children, to force her to surrender her dignity. Her death was her refusal, her final message. You can seize my kingdom, you can destroy my line, but you cannot take my choice. You cannot parade me. You cannot claim that victory. She died on her terms, dressed as a queen, surrounded by the symbols of power Octavian had worked so carefully to strip away. But here's the final cruelty. Octavian won anyway. He couldn't parade the real Cleopatra, so he constructed a substitute, a statue, an effigy. During his triumph in Rome, a massive image of Cleopatra with a snake attached to her arm was carried through the streets. The Roman crowd witnessed Cleopatra in Octavian's triumph, saw her defeated, saw her reduced to the image he wanted them to remember. The propaganda worked. The version of Cleopatra as the exotic Egyptian seductress who died by snakebite became the story that endured for 2,000 years. And Caesarion, the child Cleopatra died believing she might save, was murdered 3 weeks later. Octavian sent assassins to intercept him as he fled toward India. Julius Caesar's only biological son, 17 years old, was killed on the road in the Egyptian desert. The younger children survived. They were paraded in Octavian's triumph in their mother's place. Raised in Rome as wards of Octavian's sister, monitored closely, given limited futures, never permitted to return to Egypt. Cleopatra died believing her sacrifice might protect them, believing that choosing the manner of her death over participation in Octavian's spectacle was an act of dignity. In reality, Octavian obtained everything he wanted: the propaganda victory, the elimination of rivals, the conquest of Egypt, control of the narrative. Cleopatra's death bought nothing except the way she died. And that's what those 10 days reveal about power at its most systematic. Octavian didn't just want to defeat Cleopatra. He wanted to dismantle her psychologically first. To transform her love for her children into a weapon against her will to die with dignity. To construct an impossible choice, dignity or children, and force her to exist inside it. To measure her for humiliation. To show her exactly what awaited her in Rome. To offer false hope that cooperation might save what mattered most. It was a machine. Every element calculated, every pressure point identified, every moment engineered to strip her of agency until surrender felt rational. And when it didn't work, when Cleopatra chose death anyway, Octavian simply paraded an image instead. That is real power. Not the capacity to kill, but the ability to control the narrative even when your enemy denies you. If this exposed something unsettling about how ancient power functioned, how defeating enemies wasn't sufficient, they had to be broken first. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll continue uncovering how systematic destruction shaped the ancient world. Leave a comment with your thoughts on whether Cleopatra's final choice was a victory, a defeat, or both. Stand in Alexandria today. The tomb where Cleopatra died is gone. The palace where she spent her last 10 days lies underwater, lost to earthquakes and time. All that remains are the stories and the question. She chose death over humiliation, yet her image was paraded anyway. She died to protect her children, yet Caesarion was killed. She controlled the manner of her death, but not the story that followed. Those 10 days between August 1st and August 12th reveal something essential about power and agency. Sometimes the only choice remaining is how you lose. Sometimes dignity costs everything and purchases nothing except the knowledge that the choice was still yours. Cleopatra died a queen alone in a sealed stone room, accompanied only by 2 loyal handmaidens. She failed to save her kingdom, failed to save her children, succeeded only in denying Octavian the satisfaction of parading her living body through Rome. Whether that was enough, whether it mattered, that's the question that echoes across 2,000 years. Remember those 10 days. Remember what Octavian built, a psychological machine designed to break the last pharaoh of Egypt before her death. Remember how close it came to working. And remember why Cleopatra chose death anyway. Not because it saved anything, but because it was the only choice Octavian couldn't take from her. That's what her final days were. Not romance, not legend, just the systematic destruction of agency and one woman's refusal to let it be complete.